Okay, here we are, another edition of Spirit of the Game. I am thrilled to be joined by, I'll say it, our very own Robert Duke. And by the way, Robert, you live on because I call Lewis Harry, our rules and competitions director, Robert, all the time. So
Sure, he
you're
loves that.
stuck in, yeah, he does love it very much. Thank you for joining. Just to put you at ease, this is an audio only recording, so you could be making faces or whatever you want. So thanks for joining. So let's just sort of set the tone here and tell us about. Let me just kind of introduce Robert properly. Robert was our director of rules and competitions for what was it, 4 years, 5,
4 or 5 years. Yeah.
4 or 5 years? Yeah. And now as a referee, is that the right title? Referee? What is your
Rules
title?
official. Either way, interchange. Yeah.
Rules official for the LPGA. So long journey to get there. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get introduced to golf, and then how did that segue into golf administration?
Yeah. Glad to be here, first of all. Definitely miss Colorado, and that was part of my journey. So we'll get there. But grew up, my dad got me into the game, which I think is pretty common. And during, high school, got a job at the little course down in Franklin and Tennessee. I grew up in Tennessee. I went to Belmont University, but in high school, got a job and I was selling range tokens and slushies behind the counter there for the driving range of the par three course. Obviously, a big golfer, love golf, love golf. Then, realized that this could be somewhat of a career, if I kept pursuing it, and got a job with the Tennessee Golf Association my first year after my freshman year, out in the TGA Junior Tour, which is operated by the Tennessee Golf Association. Has since been bought, sponsored, whatever, by Brant Snedeker. It's now the Sneds Tour, and they're doing a lot of good things. But got my start there, and it was 20 interns. Hey, we're having a tournament out here at this course. Maybe it's marked, maybe it's not. The holes are cut where they are. Here's some scorecards. Go run it. Very soon, I was like, this is what I want to be doing. And again, realized there's a very niche career there. So kept pursuing that and was pretty lucky. I was 18, 19 years old and immediately knew what I wanted to do. And I know that's not very common. I know some people are still looking for what they really want to do when they grow up. But I right away, I was very lucky to figure that out. So kind of kept pulling at that thread and did internships and did a internship with the junior tour down in Florida for a summer. Did a boat ride internship, which for those listening is co-funded by the USGA to get people, like me that are interested in golf administration into golf administration. And I did that out in Northern California at the NCGA and was at Pebble Beach for the better part of a year doing that. And then was on the operations team for the AT&T Pro-Am. So I got to go to Pebble every day for work for 2 or 3 months, which was really cool, obviously. From there, again, I knew I wanted to do more inside the ropes, rules and comps versus the ops side of it, which I see a lot now more on the LPGA Tour with the ops part of it because of the build outs and the footprint outside the ropes. But we knew I wanted to go inside the ropes. Took a job with the Illinois section PGA in Chicago for 2 years as their director of rules and competitions right out of my boat right. And then from there, went to Colorado Golf Association here in Denver. First time I'd ever been to Colorado. I remember thinking when I was driving back, Ashley Barnhart was driving me back from interview, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize the mountains are like right there. And it was very cool. I just, I'm from the South and, we have our mountains over there, but it was just, right there. It was really cool. Anyways, obviously got that job and did that for 4 or 5 years in Denver, and then went to the Symetra Tour at the time, Epson Tour now, which is the pathway to the LPGA Tour, the developmental tour for the LPGA Tour. There are 10 cards handed out a year for the top 10 Epson players to go to the LPGA Tour for status. But did that for about a year and a half, 2 years, and then joined the LPGA Tour full time here in this last January. So it's June right now. So I've been doing that for about 6 months on the LPGA, and here we are. So it come a long way from, again, selling range tokens and slushies at the par three course in Tennessee.
You sure have, and it's really so cool for us to be able to be a part of that journey, and hopefully provided some important development and opportunities for you to hone your skills. You're part of a great lineage between you and Thomas Pagel and Pete Liss, who's on the PGA Tour, all of whom have gone on to really be feathers in the cap of the CGA. So we're very proud of you. So let's start in. This is a Rules of Golf podcast. So every month we put out a new podcast. Hopefully our listeners are enjoying them. We did get our first sort of nasty gram. And if that listener is listening, we do appreciate you. The topic was rules, the most debated rules. And basically the criticism was we were agreeing with the rules the way they're written. But things like divots and fairways, anchoring, stuff that people really want to gets them foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
And the listener said, well, if you're going to just agree with the USGA, what makes them debated? And I was like, sorry, that's kind of what there's a reason why. As I have always said, those who criticize the rules are criticizing, this is a quote from Richard Francis, generations of sane and sensible golfers. So if you really think a rule is stupid, then I think the rules humble us and train us to appreciate them. And I would be curious how you'd react to that.
Is that from the Golfers at Law book, that Richard Francis quote?
No, I think Golfers at Law was written by Jeffrey Cousins.
That's right.
Great book. But yeah. No, the Richard Francis was chair of the rules committee. And anyway, what do you think about that? When people say, first of all, let me just ask you the question. What do you think are the most debated rules?
I mean, I think the divot in the fairway is number one. And I guess your question was, it wasn't really a debate. You were agreeing with them. Well, obviously, like that got a reaction out of that commenter. And I think that's something that we as rules officials get asked a lot of. And me personally, I'll just be in my cart at, an event and people will come up. And most of the time it's like, hey, where's the 18th hole? And it's like, okay, over there. But sometimes they'll say, hey, I got a rolling for you. And I'm obviously actively working. So a lot of times I'm like, well, it's table this, or sometimes you can talk to them or whatever. But they'll say, yeah, at my club event or whatever, this happened. And, I do still get a decent amount that say, hey, what's with the whole divot in the fairway? Like, when's that going to be like, obviously GUR? I think that's what all people reckon it to is it's ground under repair, which of course it's not. And it's such a central principle to the rules and how you play the game. You play the course as you found it. We accept the good with the bad. We used to talk about that in our rules seminars where I'd say, if you roll it out of the divot, by the same token, if you slice it off in the woods and it hits a tree and bounces back into the fairway, I assume that you also pick that ball up and go throw it back in the woods because that's where you hit it. And if you don't take the bad breaks, you certainly won't take the good breaks, right? Obviously, that's not true. So, yeah, to me, the number one is divot in the fairway, and I don't think it will ever change, and it shouldn't ever change. Based on, again, that's such a core principle to everything else around it is playing the course as you find it within reason. Obviously, there are other rules that say, okay, you're in temporary water, you're on an obstruction, you've got, a TIO in your way, you're not going to play the ball as it lies. You've got a grandstand there. We're going to get you out. But central to that, you're on the surface of the ground, your lie is such a big component of how you play your next shot. I don't think that will or can ever change.
Right. Well, I want to focus our conversation because you and I could talk forever. Yeah. And we have. Thankfully, we worked together for 4 or 5 years, so we got to talk a lot and disagree a lot, which was always fun. I want to really focus the conversation on the LPGA, your role as a rules official. And I'm a big fan of the LPGA. I just think the talent out there, you've seen it. So, and I also want to keep the focus on rules as well. So we'll try to stay in that lane as best we can. But just to kind of set the context for the LPGA, can you sort of explain or just sort of share what you saw already is the difference between the Epson Tour, the level of play, and now on the LPGA Tour?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's certainly I will say there is overlap. There's a lot of really talented players on Epson Tour that when you see them play, you're like, they're going to be successful one day. The biggest one that stands out for me was Lilia Vu. I mean, she won this year. in Thailand earlier. I didn't know that she won again. And she was someone I saw on the App Store. You could see her
Yeah,
shining
she
already.
won the Chevron, right?
Yeah, Chevron, yes. So Thailand
Yeah.
and Chevron. And so yeah, she's a major champion already. And when I started on the Symetra tour, she'd been up and down a couple times, I think, but I could, she was on the Epson tour for that season, and you could just see her shining. So there's a lot of good players. I think the players that you see, um, that you'd think, to me, that are going to, make it on the LPGA, they have incredible consistency. They have a really good short game. They're not gonna, they're smart. They're gonna make good decisions. They're gonna take their medicine. They're gonna play, okay, well, I'm just gonna punch out and try to make par versus I'm gonna try to make that hero shot to make birdie. They understand they can make a lot of pars and then make 2 or 3 birdies, and that's a good day. They're not trying to get it all back at once. I think they stay within themselves. So, um, a lot of it too is composure. You play on the Epson tour, there's maybe not a lot of people there. Then you go to the Chevron, you go to a big event, and there's a lot of people there. I mean, I think we're going to see that hopefully this weekend at the KPMG, which is a Baltusrol. That's a major. 2 weeks, the Women's Open's at Pebble Beach, which will be amazing. I'm not going to either of those, but I'll definitely be able to tune in on TV and watch the coverage. I think that'll be great. But there's that pressure that you really can't replicate when you've got fans and cameras and just all that pressure on the line. You've got that purse. So the biggest difference, I think, I'll be in a rolling with a player and there's so many people on it, and you think it's just me and you there because they're very calm, they're composed. This is just part of their job. And, it's they never let the moment get too big, I think. And they're just playing golf, and some players are better at that than others, obviously. And I think you see that on the big stages. But to me, that's the biggest difference. And, um, they all, a lot of the players, they drive the ball well, but to me, it's that short game where they're getting up and down consistently from a lot of places. And it's not that they're necessarily chipping the ball to like a foot and tapping it in. A lot of them are, but they'll be in a tough position, get it out to like 10, 12 feet and make that par putt.
Right.
That's a big difference. And you do that a couple times around, that's a huge boost. So to me, that's the biggest thing, is that short game and just staying composed in the moment when the moment gets really big.
So one of the biggest topics being discussed right now, and it certainly meets our definition of debated, is the rollback of the golf ball. I have my opinions on it, which I'll do my best to keep out of this, at least out of this question. Do you think, first of all, what do you think about it?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, and number two, do you think it should be? Is it relevant to the LPGA? Is that just a men's elite game topic?
Yeah, I mean, so when you look at it, right, you've got the world of golf. I think from reading, the model local rule, the proposed model local rule the USGA has put out in their Distance Insights project, it's not for that 99%, right, that's playing at the amateur level. It's that weekend player maybe. So it's not them trying to roll back that. It's for the elite competitions, and I don't think they really even get to men versus women. They just say elite events. You know, I don't think the LPGA needs it. I don't think, because we're not playing courses at their maximum length. We're playing courses and we're using second, third, sometimes fourth box from the rear, and we're still playing it where we have certain design features in play, and we're able to get the full gamut of clubs in play. We're able to let them use, try to make them use all 14 clubs. They're not hitting driver off every tee. So I think we do a good job with that. So I don't think necessarily we need it. So, okay, taking that out, it's probably looking more toward the men's game, whether it be PGA, Corn Ferry, elite, amateur, NCAA's. I don't know. I've gone back and forth on it. I think, I've, we had talked about it where, it's like you have all these golf courses that they have to be lengthened. They become extinct because, the elite tour player can carry it, and all you have to do is change the ball, and those features come back into play, and it puts more of a emphasis on not driving the ball off the tee just stupid far, and that bomb and gouge thing. So I don't know. I mean, I go back and forth on it. I think, you've got a lot of other things with course setup, right? Firmness of fairways, um, you know, how there's just the golf course is prepared that also helps that. I mean, you get that bounce, how firm the fairways are. Um, that also helps it. So I don't know, I think I'd like to see it, maybe on the men's game, but I don't know what that opens up. I mean, this game is however, 400 years old or whatever, and we've never done anything like this as far as I know, where you roll back the golf ball. It's kind of there's never been a leash on it. I mean, I guess there has been within reason of, there's MOI and there's restrictions, but to consciously stop that growth, that's never really been done before, as far as I can see. So it sounds like, they have all these papers out there. They have these dates of, comment period, and this would theoretically take place January 1st, 26, I think. So they've got these things in place. So it feels like it might be coming. So I'm interested to see how it goes, because it sounds like they're going to do it, but I don't know at what level and how it will affect the game. And I know bifurcation has always been a bad word. I listened to the one with Thomas recently, and I think he said options. You have different options now to use as model local rule, but I've always likened it to baseball, right? When you go to the majors, you're using a wooden bat now. You're not using an aluminum bat, and that's probably for the best, because if using aluminum bats, then it'd just be a home run derby. So I'd be interested to see how it goes. I think it'll be a good change of pace, and if it goes through and if it works, that could change how it's played on a tour level, because I
Yeah,
think that's
well,
what we're going to do it for.
I like your open-mindedness. You've gone back and forth, and I think that shows just how thoughtful you are. But frankly, how thoughtful. I think a lot of times we're all viewed, and I'll put myself in this category, when you're study the rules and when you're viewed as an expert in the rules, that you just are these sort of robots that just agree with. It takes a long time to get to that point, and once you get to that point, and I'll be the first to point out things I still would like to see changed in the rules, but again, it's very humbling when you realize, just when you really think about a topic on a deeper level. And I'm with you. I shouldn't say that. I'm not with you. I'm all for the rollback. Who am I kidding?
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, so you said something there that I wanted to pick up on, and it's certainly, it may not be necessarily rules, but it's about your job, and that's setting up for a championship, for a
Mm-hmm.
tournament. And I love what you said about using the third, fourth box up. And to me, that's part of the reason the rollback is needed, is there's no creativity in course setup anymore. And I think you arrive at it. Obviously, that all needs to be done well in advance. You need to get, the
Mm-hmm.
firmness and rough heights perfect. Whereas when you're running a women's event, you even if you haven't done a lot of prep, you have options to create a playing experience. And so just talk about, when you're an advanced official, what goes into setting up for a tournament and what are the things you consider. And I love what you said about getting them to use all 14 clubs. So just elaborate on that.
Yeah, so we do have LPGA has an agronomist that is working with the superintendent, and he is a GCSA member for 20, 25 years. He was at a grassroots facility for a long time, so he speaks the language with the superintendent. Not that we can't, but he's in there early, and he's talking about, here's what we expect, here's what we need, as far as because we're going, especially the LPGA Tour, we're worldwide. So we're playing on different kinds of grass, different kinds of soil, different kinds of elevation, even. I mean, we go to, if we don't go to Denver, but if we did, that would be part of it, is, okay, well, how far do we need to play this tee? Because now we have elevation problems or differences. So he's going all over the world and working with different kinds of supers and different kinds of climates. So he's going in there saying, here's what we need, here's the feel we need, and how do we get it there based on your type of golf course, your type of drainage, your type of soil, your type of everything, and the layout and how we want it to play. So he'll go in there with a mind of how, the distance that we want to play from and kind of the conditions we expect. So he's doing a lot of that with the super on site. Obviously, the advanced official is having communication with the superintendent as well, but we do have an agronomist who's really world class and doing and speaking that language with the superintendent, and tying that into how we want a professional competition to perform and how do we want the course to behave. And that, obviously, a big part of that is green speeds and firmness, and how we want the ball rolling. There's obviously courses where if we got the roll up to a 13 with as pitched as the greens are, it just wouldn't work. So sometimes that might be an 11, 11 and a half. Sometimes it's a 12, 12 and a half. So he's in there early doing that. We're looking at, first setting up the golf course, what our average and highest carries are, what our lowest carries are. So we're not, boxing out someone who's on the low side. Also, we're looking at, and I've had this where we have a dog leg, but if we, the tee, if you just looked at it on paper, like, oh, we want to play it at this distance. Well, if we did, our average driver wouldn't be able to get around a certain corner or have a forced carry. So you're looking at that and making sure that the course is playable for everyone. Certainly, we're not setting it up, on the low end where the bigger players are just going to be, able to
So if I
shoot,
can,
drive the green.
yeah, if I can interrupt there, I'm just curious, what are the average drive lengths for an LPGA player?
Average, I would say, we get probably 260, 270. That's probably
Average?
on the higher end, yeah. We get players that easily get 290.
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me, but
Maybe,
the average,
maybe like 260-ish. And there's,
yeah,
our performance insights. I need to look into that more. But from what I see, it's, around 260 or so, I'd say.
yeah, yeah.
250 even. But so, we take that into account and kind of what's in that area. And again, like you said, we want to, like I said, we want to divvy it up. We don't want every drive to leave them with 150 in, 160 in. And then
Do you feel like distance is as much of an advantage on the LPGA Tour as it is on the PGA Tour? Do you think it's the longest hitters that are dominating, just like the men's side?
I think it's an advantage. I don't think it's everything. I think obviously if player A can hit the ball 290 and player B is hitting it 255, 260, that's going to be an advantage. But you've got those players who they're not as long, certainly. And they're still winning because they're such good ball strikers and they have such good short game. So on any given week, we have players who are not as long and average or below average on distance, which again, probably 250, 260. I think 270 is probably the high end, 250, 260 on average.
Yeah.
There's still gonna be people that are gonna win. So it's not like every week it's the longest possible hitters because if those hitters that are the longest ones are having a bad wedge game, their putts aren't dropping, then they're just not going to win. Mm-hmm. Conversely, someone's hitting 7-iron and someone else is hitting 5 or 6-iron, but they're just playing better. They're gonna do it. So I don't think it's tried and true. Oh, the longest hitters are going to win. I think it's always going to be an advantage. I think choosing the options, would you rather be 20 yards further than where you are? Sure, but it's not going to yield wins every time, I don't think.
Right. So I assume you've done some advanced work, or is that something that gets sort of, since you're relatively new to the LPGA Tour, is that something the more experienced officials are asked to do?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I did on the Epson Tour, I started advancing toward the end of my beginning of my second year. I came in a weird time where it was the middle of the season. So I kind of co-advanced, and I've done that this year, so I haven't done a full advance. I will do one later this year. And for us and people listening, the advance work, you have your tournament week. Your advance official is getting in the Monday before tournament week on site. So you are on site for 2 weeks, and you are the one who's marking the golf course, working with, staff on site. Obviously, like I said, you're talking with the super prior along with the agronomist. So there's a lot more that goes into it. And I always kind of liken it to the advanced officials, the one hosting the dinner for the other rules officials. They're setting up, they've got, they're the ones in charge of the admin that week. The other officials are coming in and being rules officials, which is what I'm currently doing. So I've co-advanced and shadow advanced earlier this year, and I'll do my own later this year. But yeah, it's definitely not something you start and then right away you're like, oh, you're advancing this event. There's a lot of observation. There's a lot of questions and checklists of how we do things. So there's definitely an indoctrination period of how to do things. So I will be doing it later this year, but just not yet. Again,
I miss your analogies. I love that hosting the dinner for the other. You're like the immediate past champion at the Masters. You pick the food and
right. Yeah, everyone's just showing up on the Monday of tournament week, and you've already been there for a week, and you're the, if there's a problem with something, there, official will come to you as the advance and say, hey, this is something I noticed. Can you get with the super or get with whomever and your point of contact to fix that? And that could be a lot of things, but
Right. Does
yeah,
that does
it's like
that
a point
role
person.
does that role continue throughout the week in terms of once the tournament is dialed in and everything's
Mhm.
up and running, or is the advanced official kind of sort of taking a different role, or during the competition itself, or are they just out doing base of play and like everybody else?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, pretty much the advanced official is doing all of that in addition to being a regular rules official. So the advanced official, they're still doing setup. They're going to set up the back nine. That's setting the tees in the morning and selecting the hole locations every day where they're going to go for the back nine. Another official does the front. So the advanced is still doing that. They're still sending out things to media and to other invested parties of here's the yardage you're doing for that day. So there's a little more paperwork, but the advanced official will be out on the golf course and just officiating. And okay, my zone, we need you on 2, 3, 4. The advanced official would go to 2, 3, 4 and officiate. And if a group needs to be timed or whatever, then the advanced official is doing that too. So they're being a rules official along with their other um, advanced
Right.
duties. So
Right.
there's a lot going on for an advanced official. That's a big 2 weeks, and certainly big tournament week because you're having to balance a lot of that with everything else going on.
Yeah. Okay, keeping the conversation going, I hit on a lot of different things. So this is kind of a broad topic, but what is the most common ruling that
Hmm.
you are making week in and week out?
Well, I'll give you top five because it's kind of a mixed bag depending on the golf course, right? So we might have just the way it's set up or the way, we might have a cart path right next to a penalty area and it's in a hot area. So we're going to get a lot of balls there. So we're going to be doing a lot of double drops from the penalty area onto the cart path and then, taking cart path relief and all that entails. So that could be any given week that I could have 10 rulings a day on a specific hole because of that. Most recently, we did one at Liberty National on the 10th hole. There was a lot of that. So that week, we had a lot of double drops from a red penalty area onto a cart path. Um, Still get a lot of obstruction stuff, cart path, just confirming, hey, I'm really near this sprinkler head. And I think we did a rules video on it about when do I have interference, and
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been a lot of stuff on TV where you see that. So that's still a big one of, hey, just confirming, I'm able to get relief because my ball is yay far behind it and I'm going to dig. Yeah. Okay. Or I'm in the rough, but I'm standing on a sprinkler. Can I drop that in the fairway? That's a big one. We still get a decent amount. Get a lot of the 2-and-2 situations where sprinkler head is near the
Mm-hmm.
green and it's in a closely mown area. That one's a big one, and just confirming, and because that's a little involved in making sure they're doing everything right, and with the other players. TIOs sometimes it depends. Like at Chevron, the way it was set up, we I think essentially stationed an official pretty close to 18 to say we're getting calls every group or two. It'd be nice just to have someone there instead of having to go back every time. So depending on the way that's set up, we get a lot of TIO stuff for grandstands or for bleachers or whatever. Um, Still get a lot of for GUR where a player says, "Hey, is this gun in repair? Is it not?" They're looking for relief. Um, Again, we went to a course in Arizona. In that specific week, it was a desert course. You get a lot of either lost balls or okay, I found my ball in the brush and I got to take it unplayable. And usually it's going to be 30, 40 yards back on the line into another fairway. So we're helping that procedure. Just by the way, the kind of the feng shui of the course is, it's back and forth and there's just a lot of brush. So you miss the fairway a little bit. That 2 club lengths or stroke and distance option isn't appealing. So you got to kind of help with that back on the line. So that's a big one. Yeah. So that's kind of our top 5 to 10, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So
nothing too crazy.
when I think about officiating at the level you're at, PGA, LPGA, I think about TIOs as being, because it seems like every time you're seeing a ruling
Mm-hmm.
on television, it's often a leader, somebody in contention dealing with a TIO.
Right.
What would be your sort of overall? First of all, explain TIO is a temporary immovable
Yeah.
obstruction. They're not dealt with in the day-to-day game, not even at the state level. These are
Yeah.
erected obstacles that are there only for the conduct of the tournament,
Mm-hmm.
largely corporate hospitality. How do you sort of just give us, you're so good at this, kind of your overall view of them to kind of
Yeah.
explain the philosophy of why does a player get relief from these things? It's so different than what we're
Yeah.
used to.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, and the reason you see it is because usually it's late in the round and it's a little abnormal. They're not going to show necessarily a player taking relief from a cart path or a sprinkler. That's pretty common. So you do get that on TV a little more. And that's, it is kind of a TV role, right, in that regard. Because when I was working prior to this, I didn't really, I knew the TIOs, but I didn't really dive into them like I would the other roles because it's like, when am I going to reuse that? Is that the, CGA match player, the CGA AM? Within reason of maybe it's a starting 10 somewhere, right? So really didn't have that big of a scope on it before, but now it's every event you've got one. And really it's just boiling it down and it's kind of simplifying it as best you can, because it is a little intimidating when you see this big grandstand around a green. And that's really what it is, right? To your question, what is a TIO? It's so, and the rule kind of says this, and they've updated the rules this year on it and it had a few more diagrams that really make it a lot easier to kind of digest. But it's something that's erected in conjunction with the competition, that's, grandstands, portalets, right? You've got fans there, you've got food vendors, you've got generators, you've got leaderboards, scoreboards. So all this stuff that in 6 months at that golf course is not there. It's there for a very specific reason, to host this competition and to host thousands of people that are coming out, again, with the infrastructure of bathrooms and food and grandstands and all that stuff. So it's not common for average everyday golf, obviously, but it's something we have to use at a competition. So, like everything else in the rules, right? At one point there were never cart paths on the golf course, and then someone invented carts, and then they invented cart paths, and now we have to have a rule for cart paths. And so someone said we should have grandstands and bathrooms and food and generators, so we have to make a rule for that. So the way I look at it, and the easiest thing for me, is you just treat it as you can treat it as an obstruction, right? You can just take relief and just imagine it, right, as a giant sprinkler box. That's an easy way to kind of mulch through it, is to say, all right, well, if this was a sprinkler box, it really wouldn't be intimidating. We just get our area of intended swing off. From there, we get a club length, drop it. There are times, and that's not an option, right, because they're well behind it. So you're swinging them out. And most of the stuff when you're behind it is really not that difficult. You're just finding the corridor and getting out, or if they want to take physical interference, you can. But the ones that seem a little trickier, riders, when you got the green, you've got a horseshoe built around it where, physical interference, that's going to take you maybe 30, 40 yards the other direction, in which case, we're contemplating that and expecting that. So we're putting in drop zones. We're putting in, notices about where you can and can't go, because this is closer. We're going to go to the nearest. And, so we definitely spend a lot of time thinking about that and putting it in the local rules and making sure we're not A, disadvantaging anybody, and B, giving someone a totally good advantage because there's a TIO. And sometimes that's just the way it is, right? If you've got a TIO right behind the green and someone hits a bad shot or an errant shot and launches it into the TIO as a kind of a backstop, well, nothing we can really do about that. That's just the way it is. So we have to accommodate that in the fairest possible way. But again, that's something that it's hard to prepare for other than just reading the rule. You don't get a lot of experience doing TIOs until you start doing this type of event. With all the other stuff I listed, with cart paths and unplayables and GUR, you get that from day one. I was working junior tour stuff. We didn't have grandstands at the junior tour or CGA, obviously. So it's something you just adapt to. And again, once you do enough of them, it's a
Yeah.
little intimidating at first,
You know,
but
you've already kind of helped me just thinking of it as a big. That's why your ability to use examples or use analogies is so great as a way to teach the rules.
Yeah.
And think of it as a big sprinkler box. I know
Yeah.
that it's not, because if it's in your, I tend to go to the more complex where it intervenes on the player's direct line to the hole, but
Right.
there's trees in between and kind of these really complex ones.
Yeah.
But I would say 9 times out of 10, they're probably pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And that's something that you kind of not figure out as you go, but as you do more of these rulings, 9 times out of 10, yeah, you're just taking your normal relief off of it. But there are those times. And again, I think the USGA did a good job with the new rules this year, I should say the new TIO rules. There's a new, I think they call it a brochure or something, or at the back of the, rules
I'll have
app.
to, yeah, I'll have to check it out for sure
Yeah,
because
they
I
did a
need
really
help
good
on that.
job with
Although
updating.
I never have that opportunity, which I'm glad. Okay,
Yeah,
I want to just so we have about 10 minutes, let's say.
yeah.
Any controversial ruling so far where you found yourself on the hot seat with a player?
Um, I
You
wouldn't
don't
say anything
you don't have
controversial.
to name the player, but it'd be a lot more fun if you do.
No, I tried to think about that before we started because I figured you might ask that, and I can't think of anything that was controversial where there was any, two players were arguing back and forth. I will say a common situation is, you've got a tee box and just where the penalty area is, like right off the tee. It's that, oh, where did it cross kind of thing, right? Like
Mhm.
I thought it crossed here. Well, I thought it crossed here. Um, and that's really as, let's say contentious as it's gotten. But for me, that's the kind of where you got two players who don't really agree on it. You just have to mulch through it and try to figure out the best possible or the most correct spot of where it went in. And it's not a perfect science. I know, a lot of times we're not on TV, but I know when I watched the PGA and I think Kepka hit it on the last day where it was like, oh, we don't know where it crossed. And it was like a weird creek
Yeah, I remember the whole. I
on
think it was on
sticks.
6. Yeah.
And then during the broadcast, they had, um, the tracker
Mhm.
was like, oh, it like had like a 3D like version of the hole and like the exact fly to the ball, like, oh, here's where it crossed, exact, and
Yeah.
they could radio the rules official, which is really nice. Say, hey, it crossed about 30 yards behind that tree or whatever. Give them a marker, say it crossed about 30 yards behind that tree, right behind the red stake. Yeah, there you go. And you're just estimating and going. We don't get that a lot. So the most controversial I'll get are stuff like that, where we're deciding where the ball crossed. And again, nothing's really ever gotten overly
Mhm.
contentious. From my spot, we're able to figure it out, usually in a quick manner and an accurate manner, which is the most important thing, that it's correct, and keep playing. But other than that, I've not had anything where there's, to me, been an argument or there's been a we don't know, or this is, we're going out. We feel like we're going outside of the rules at all. It's usually pretty it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of
Yeah.
brain bending things that happen. I mean, there's certainly stuff where you're like, okay, let's think about this and make sure we're right, but nothing ever controversial. And certainly in my short time that's been on TV where, we're having to weed through it on the last day, and it's a big situation where, and there's two parties that are really getting after it, or getting after me. I haven't had that happen yet.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Part of the reason I asked that is when Pete Liss, who was like you, went from the CJ to the LPGA Tour, Suzanne Pedersen had a warm welcome for him and basically gave him a dressing down as the newbie. So I'm glad
Oh
you
yeah.
avoided that.
Yeah.
So I purposely saved this for last because if I made it the first topic, me, we never get off of it, and that's pace of play. So
Mm.
we're going to put ourselves on the clock. So we have 5 minutes to talk about pace of play, and I promise for
Great.
listeners who are like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to talk about pace." But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's such a fundamental. This is a soapbox. You know me well.
Yes.
For me, so just give us kind of your sense of, and having now worked CJ events, seen it
Mm-hmm.
at that level, worked
Yeah.
Epson, now LPGA. What are the common denominators with pace of play that you see? How big a problem is it?
Mm-hmm.
And if it is a problem, how would you propose addressing it maybe differently than we are now?
Yeah, I mean, I like our pace of play policy a lot, I will say. And Epson Tour and LPGA use this exact same policy. The only difference is maybe the amounts of a fine could trigger. But I like our policy in that, and I'm not going to go through it all, but in short, it gives the group, a warning when they're out of position, and then it triggers, okay, you were warned, you didn't make up position. Now you will be timed until you do. And that's something I think you and I had talked about before I got into that, of, because the CGA we had at this one point, like, oh, you missed your checkpoint, here's a stroke penalty, maybe, and we'll decide at the end of the round whether it sticks or not. And one of your things, I think you said there are two things in life that you're taught. One, before you punish me, you'll warn me, and two, you wait in line and it's your turn. You stand in line and you wait, and then it's your turn. And those things are a little, I think, they're unrelated in this regard, but we do give a warning. So I do like that, to say, hey, officially, this is a warning. You're behind. whatever reason, you need to pick it up. So I do like that. With pace of play, it's interesting because it's something that everyone's involved in, whether you know it or not, or whether you like it or not. As soon as you hit that ball on the first tee, you are now involved in pace of play. You are in position with the group in front of you. You're holding up the group behind you. You are XYZ under your time par. And all that goes into, especially your position in relation to the group in front of you, whether you're out of position or not. That's our trigger. So you could play 18 holes and you may not ever have a ruling, but the minute you tee off, you are involved in pace of play. You're in the middle of it, you're at the front of it, you're at the back of it, you are involved. So it is very important that we keep it going. And I think our policy is good and it does that. But it's not the same for everyone. I know CG had a different policy, AJG had a different policy, PGA Tour is a different policy. I don't know what that is, but everyone's got a little different philosophy of how to make it work for their players at their events with whatever's going on. So I don't think there's one perfect answer, because if there was, then we'd all be doing it that way. And I don't know, maybe the perfect answer was when they did the shot clock masters, right? That's very labor intensive, and you time every player, every shot. Maybe that's the way to do it, but that's really hard to do.
So yeah, so do you think the pace of play is a problem in high level competitive golf, or even all golf? I mean, do you think, let's just leave it in your world. Let's not.
Yeah.
Is it a problem?
I would say it's a problem. I'd say it's there, and there are slow players and there are fast players, and that's what our policy is. It's rulemaking to have a consistent flow on the golf course and making sure that we're not I think pace of play is a problem if we're taking, way too long to play golf. Call it 6 hours. Then I think that's a problem. But what every, I think, tour's policy does and is intended to do is to keep it moving at a consistent pace. Obviously, there's some situations where if there's a ruling in front or we've got a drivable par 4, we're going to have a backup there and there's nothing we can do. But overall, every tour's policy is to keep play moving at a consistent pace and to keep it moving at a proper pace. So I think the problem comes when maybe there isn't a policy and there isn't a way to get players around. Because I think if there's not a policy, you say, hey, can you play quicker? Players are going to say, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take my time, as much time as I want. And that could be an issue. So I don't think it's a problem overall. I think it's something that we have to address because, again, like once you tee off, you are involved in pace of play. So we have to keep an eye and we have to keep a mind on that to move it along.
Right. No, I like that a lot. And it's a train. I've always said,
right.
You get on a train and you're all together.
Right.
And this idea that it's one player's cause, that's usually not the case, very rarely.
Right.
And this idea that you can, and that's where I really believe we should be looking is first of all, one of the things as I've gotten older, I've tried to slow down a little bit to say, is it a problem? And then, because my assumption is, because I love to solve problems, and sometimes I see problems where there are no problems, and so I like to pause on that. Do you think there's a problem? And to me, that's where you need to, like, distance of the golf ball. Is it a problem? And this is why that's such a it's such a divisive topic, because some think it's a problem and some don't. Some think it's great that the golf ball's going so far. So
right.
I think you'd have a larger percentage of people saying pace of play is a problem in golf than are going to say distance is a problem in golf. But once you agree that it's a problem, then you have to break it down. What is the cause? How big a problem is it? And and
that's a good point. I mean, is it a problem? How do we address it? Again, everyone's got their own way of addressing it, but everyone has a policy. I mean, right? Everyone's got something on paper that says, here's our pace of play policy. Some of it's more, some of it's tighter than others. Some of it's more labor intensive than those, but everyone's got a policy. Everyone is working on it. I think it's very important, and I think it's a big part of our job, and it is. I mean, most of our day is looking at pace of play, because that is what is the constant throughout, again, the whole competition. Is you are always in the middle of pace of play. And, for us, there's, times we need to hit there. We have TV windows. We have, our policy helps address that to say, we expect to play at this pace, and our policy helps enforce that and get them around in a reasonable and fair, I think, amount of time. And, it's not everyone would agree. And there's a lot to it. I mean, it's like traffic, right? You could have one hiccup, kind of butterfly effects the entire rest of the day. And conversely, that one thing doesn't happen, and we could have better flow or worse flow. And there's a lot of moving parts to it. But I think what we do tries to keep it as consistent as possible,
Yeah.
which is the goal for us, I think.
So let's end here.
Okay.
What is the question you were prepared for me to ask that I didn't ask?
Um, I think I was prepared for you to ask the rolling back of the golf ball, which we talked about. I thought we would spend more time on pace of play, so that was a little bit of curveball. I'm glad we got that in there because I know we've talked about it a lot, and that seems to be something everyone wants to talk about, which is good because I mean it's it's something that we work a lot in. Um, I was expecting a little bit, I know it's a rules podcast, but just about golf in general. I live in Charleston now. I thought we'd talk a little bit about how golf is going in Colorado. And this is more of a you question. So this is less rules and more state health of the game in your neck of the woods. Cause I miss Denver a lot. I think the golf was incredible there. I had no idea it was that good till I left, and Charleston's good, but Denver was just fantastic with the access of public courses, the conditioning of the turf. I mean, I love the grasses in Colorado, and I see grasses all over the world now, but when Common Ground, when that was in good shape, like that was just perfect. I loved the type of grass we played on. I loved the field. I just, those little things I miss. So I thought we'd talk more about playing golf and if you're playing more golf and where you're playing golf and how golf is going. And I want to know, and I know this is going over, but I mean, you've got a big year this year. And I thought we'd talk more about the girls junior down at Air Force. You got the USAM at Cherry and Colorado Golf. So that's a lot to have two championships.
Yeah, no, I love the fact that you're
champion.
still following golf in Colorado. I intentionally wanted to talk about you. I love talking about Colorado, but your comment about the abundance of high quality public golf here is so true.
Yeah.
And I say it all the time. Having just heard it from people who have traveled and played around it, I take it for granted because I grew up here and lived my whole life here. But to be able to go play a $50 golf course that is as good as Walnut Creek or Indian Tree or you name it, they're just amazing. And we're so lucky. And I don't think I think that's part of the reason why our membership has grown so much is having a USJ handicap, is really cool because you can play a lot of different golf. We have a lot of transient golfers who don't play at one golf course. The way you get locked in other parts of the country, you have your one course. That's where you're a member of, and it's the one you can afford, and that's it. So we're very lucky. We have this great buffet of golf in Colorado. So
and that's where I'm at now is on the public golf side. I play I don't play that much. I mean, I really don't. I play maybe once a week when I'm home, and it's usually just to kill a day if I do that. Have more off time, but I'm just not around a golf course as much, which is fine. I don't really miss it in that way. I enjoy playing with friends more than I do going out by myself like I might have used to, just to get on the golf course. So I'm on the golf course so much. I kind of look at it as more of a social activity now. But yeah, again, exploring the options here. There's some great options in Charleston, but Denver, I mean, and not just, you have Denver, you have, Fort Collins, you have Colorado Springs, you've got like the mountains, right? Like that's a whole other golf scene like that. I mean, and then you've got the West Slope, and so you've got all these little pockets there that are so good. And yeah, I do miss that. And if I think I was living in Denver still, I think I would break off and try to go play a new course every week. I think that would be something I would do is I'm going to go drive up to, north of Fort Collins or west of Fort Collins and go find a course I've never played before. Because, I had a lot of good access and I knew a lot of great people. And the job I did, we involved a lot of head pros, and it was, hey, if you ever want to come play, let me know. And I didn't take as much advantage of that as I wish I had. And I hate doing that in the first place. I really hate just, hey, can I come play? But that said, I didn't get to enjoy them like maybe I could have. And if I ever go back to Denver, I'll spend a good chunk of time trying to play.
Well, it sounds like you miss Denver. We definitely miss you. It was great chatting, catching up, and we'll be keeping an eye out. Looking for you on television, hoping you're not immersed in a really controversial ruling. And one thing's for sure, you'll get the ruling right. I know that. So great talking to you, and thanks for spending the time with us.
Enjoyed it very much. Yeah, thank you for having me on.